Warning, the Savage Nation contains adult language, adult content, psychological nudity. Listener discretion is advised. Now, here he is, author of Liberalism is a Mental Disorder, Trump's War, and God, Faith, and Reason, Michael Savage.
Suicide. Suicidal ideations. Suicide is in the air. And I'm going to talk about suicide. Why is suicide at epidemic levels in the United States right now? Why? You can't figure out why? Have you ever tried to kill yourself? What saved you? How do you deal with suicidal ideations? Don't tell me you never thought about it. I don't care if the wisest guy in town with the sharpest girlfriend and the biggest career, you know it's gone through your head. So we're going to talk about that today. I'm also going to have Republican candidate for governor John Cox on the show later. We're going to also talk about tariffs from my book, Trump's War. I'm totally in favor of tariffs because they're about as American as the turnpike, as I try to teach you in Trump's War. The word turnpike itself comes back from the old days of such tariffs on roads. But ignoramuses who don't know the history of this nation don't know that tariffs are very American. And ignoramuses who don't know that, because most people in radio are not in business. Most people in radio don't understand business. Most people in radio don't export products. Most people in radio are just loudmouth blowhards who don't know anything about business. But if you actually make a product and try to ship it overseas, you'll see what tariffs are, because most countries tariff our goods. And we stupidly don't tariff theirs, which is why we elected Trump. To balance the playing field, Schmendrick. But don't tell that to talk show hosts who don't know business. I do. That's later. But I want to talk about suicide. And I will start by giving you the short version of my opinion on suicide, of why the rates are going up. We were talking, of course, because two this week. Kate Spade, which I talked about on Tuesday. Then this Cook, who I never liked. I thought it was a loudmouth blowhard. Irrespective of that, I'm not going to sit here and cry over him. I don't know the guy. I don't know how long it's going to take until CNN blames Trump. I've been waiting all day for that report from some somber, guy like Andy Blooper to say, Anthony Bourdain committed suicide because of his depression over Trump's handling of America, what he's done to this great nation. That'll be up by the nightfall, probably. So let's look at this and see what I think about suicide, because I know an awful lot about it. What? How do I know so much about suicide? Well, for one, I've studied it since I'm 18 years old, as I have studied reasons for depression since I'm 18 years old, as I have struggled with depression in my own life since I'm a kid, because of various things. Some are genetic, some are what happens to you, some are just depressing outlooks on life. Whatever the reasons are, there are ways to overcome downers and bad feelings. Then there's also ways that you can accelerate your depression and accelerate your desires, or your fears rather, to kill yourself, and overcome your basic life force, your life impulse. You understand what I'm saying? Like, most animals on earth will fight to live. Did you hear what I just said? Whether it be a bug or an elephant. There's not an animal on earth that doesn't fight to live. Not an animal on earth. Just study biology. You'll understand that. The life force is very powerful. This is how we're set up to survive. So why are the rates going up? What is this with Kate Spade had everything? Park Avenue. Anthony Bourdain, I don't know if he had everything. The guy had a history of marijuana use, heroin use, cocaine use, alcoholism. So he was struggling with something. He was full of hate, hated Donald Trump. But aside from that, why are suicide rates up? So here's what I posted this morning. Tell me what you think. And this is the order in which I would blame it. No God, no faith, antidepressant medications, marijuana, too much sugar, and a negative media. These are real reasons. As we have become detached from faith and from God, what happens? People figure they're God themselves and their body is their own. But what does Christianity say about suicide? What does Judaism say? What does Islam say? What does Buddhism say? What does Hinduism say? If you stop the average housewife in Marin County who think she's a Buddhist, even though she was born Catholic. They would think that Buddhists are allowed to kill themselves, probably. They know about as much about Buddhism as my dog does. Because even Buddhism shuns suicide. For Buddhists, the first precept is to refrain from the destruction of life, including one's own. And suicide, even in Buddhism, is seen as a negative act. And Buddhists believe if someone commits suicide in anger, he may be reborn in a sorrowful realm due to negative final thoughts. Even Buddhists, I'm picking them the last. Christianity, I know, prohibits it. What about Jews? What do Jews think about suicide? I don't mean the bagel and lox crowd. I don't mean the people who are born of Jewish heritage and don't even understand their own religion. I don't mean the Woody Allen types who mock religious Jews in every movie and in every way and every statement. I'm not talking about that. To me, that's nothing. That's a deracinated Jewish person. They're not Jewish. They're nothing. They've laughed at their own religion. They've mocked their own religion. Suicide in Jewish law is a very serious offense. The Talmud says, for him who takes his own life with full knowledge of his action, the Hebrew word is badaf, no rites are to be observed. There is to be no rending of clothes and no eulogy. Did you hear this? You didn't know any of this. But people should line up for him at the end of the burial ceremony, and the mourner's blessing should be recited as the family passes through out of respect for the living. General rule amongst Jews is whatever rites are normally performed for the benefit of the survivors should be observed. Whatever is normally done out of respect for the dead should not be observed. Didn't know that, did you? Now, we all mourn suicides in America because it hurts us. It kills us. And that goes to another point that is controversial, and I understand it. But since talk radio is about talk and about opinion, I will give you my opinion on suicide. It is the most selfish act you can commit. It is absolutely an act of aggression, especially in the cases of the type that we have seen recently. Kate Spade kills herself by hanging herself in a closet in her Park Avenue apartment and leaves a note for her 13-year-old daughter that says, ask your father why I did it. If that's not an act of aggression, I'd like to know what is. There was another famous one near where I live. A comedian hung himself with a strap in a garage, hushed up by the liberal media here. They named a tunnel after him. They can do that, but he was a terrible role model for children. They say, well, who was he? Oh, a guy who hung himself with a strap in the garage. Well, my friends, as I said then, and I'm very consistent, it was an act of aggression, in my opinion. Now, let's talk about the biomedical or the chemical reactions of various substances. Suicide rates are up. Why? Let's go back to my initial statement. No God, no faith, antidepressant meds, marijuana, too much sugar, negative media. Now, let's talk about marijuana and depression. Many of you took me up on that and said, Savage, I agree with you on everything you said, but not marijuana. It saved me. It's actually mellowing me out. I am warning you as I sit here. Marijuana is being oversold to populations in the West as a form of annihilation. It will annihilate the West. Marijuana is a death drug. And I'll leave it at that. I know what's going to happen, though. Every time I tell you anything about marijuana that's negative, I get the potheads who call, and they get defensive. So, Jim, don't take any pot is good for me calls. I'm not interested. I don't want to hear it. How's that? U.S. suicide rates increased more than 25% since 1999, CDC says. What's interesting is where the rates have increased. You'll never believe this. You'll never believe this. Nor would you believe what the reasons are for the suicides, according to the studies that have been done. How about the methods of suicide? But I really want to focus on the drug industry. And I don't mean the gangs in the streets. I mean the medical drug industry. I mean the pharmaceutical doctor industry. I mean the pharmaceutical medical industry. I mean the medical pharmaceutical industry that is pushing antidepressants down our throats. Every review I have seen shows the same thing. Antidepressants can raise the risk of suicide. Biggest ever review finds. An analysis of 70 trials of the most common antidepressants involving more than 18,000 people found that they doubled the risk of suicide and aggressive behavior in under 18s. Now, you don't want to hear this. Many of you are on antidepressants, and I'm not here to tell you don't take them. Go to your doctor. Talk to the quack. The doctors prescribe antidepressants right now like M&Ms, what used to be prescribed for Halloween. But what are the side effects of these antidepressants? How many years have I preached to you on these airwaves about the overuse of psychotropic or psychoactive medications, whether they be for children, for treating non-existent illnesses, overdiagnosed illnesses, invented illnesses, putting kids on speed. Then the kids go out in the street and get illegal drugs to keep the high going that they used to get in elementary school from whatever they were taking, Adderall, Ritalin. The kids are being turned into drug addicts, and they turn into adults. Yesterday, early in the morning, I went to a coffee shop. And I usually don't go out in the morning because I'm too busy, but I decided I had to get out in the morning. And there it was again, middle-aged, nice young white couple, maybe in their late 30s, 2 kids, nice-looking kids, in the coffee shop. And what were the children eating for breakfast? With mommy and daddy, the smart white people. The children were eating pastries. And I just shook my head and I said, these are ignoramuses. The parents are so stupid that the children are going to be stupider than the parents. They know nothing about Feingold's great work in the 1970s. They know nothing about hypoglycemia and depression. They know nothing about sugar and diabetes. They know nothing about spiking blood sugar up and down. They know nothing about why the child goes to school and has a learning disorder because his blood sugar collapsed. 45 minutes to an hour later, just when he arrives at school, he falls asleep inside from the pastry mommy and daddy gave him as they dropped him off in their Audi on the way to work. They don't understand anything about the relationship between diet and depression. So there are so many, it's a multifactorial question, and I can't cover everything in one show, and it's only my opinion. But my opinion is based upon evidence that I'm going to present to you. I'm not just talking based upon hot air. I'm talking upon a lifetime of looking into the subject of depression, because I've had my brushes with the other side of it, the dark side of it. And I found my ways out of it. Am I totally out of the water? No, we don't know what comes tomorrow. I have a great faith in God. I watch my diet. I understand very much what will trigger me into states of despair and this and that. I also know when I go down there how to get out of there. There was a time I didn't know how to get out of there. I remember a time in my life because of affirmative action and what it did to me that I wanted to die. I wanted to kill myself because of the social engineering. I had killed myself to achieve something that I wanted. And the vermin on the left said, some people will just have to put their careers on hold so that others may advance. Communism. I was one of those who had to put his career on hold so that unqualified women could advance, unqualified minorities could advance beyond me, and unqualified immigrants could advance beyond me. I thought I would die. I thought I had shamed my ancestors. You see, I was reading at that time that many Japanese students would come to America, and if they did not achieve first success, meaning high A's or whatever it was, and they failed in school or they didn't get the position that they wanted, they would commit harikari. They would die. They would kill themselves because they felt they failed their family and failed their ancestors. Well, I had the same belief much more strongly, and I still do. But the point was, for me, I found my way out. I didn't blame myself for what was done for me. I realized at a certain point it was the illiberal establishment that was destroying white males. It wasn't me they were out to get. They were out to destroy an entire race and an entire gender. The dreaded white male. My time had not come, you see. I was an immigrant son, but they said, drop dead. Drop dead. Oh, you got straight A's at Berkeley. You got a PhD. You got 2 master's degrees. You published 6 books. Drop dead. You can't have what you want. Well, it really ate me alive, but I wrote my way out of it. I ran my way out of it, and I achieved my way out of it. And then I created something for myself in this isolation, the well of loneliness that was called talk radio. And I created the Savage Nation. I created my own world. This is my own world. You are my community. And the callers to the show are your community. Do you understand that? This is our real nation because of the isolation that most of us live with. Well, that's the beginning of the show. I think you're going to be here.
Savage.
Talking about depression and suicide. I realize they're not pleasant topics. And, you know, maybe it's a bummer to think about it, but it's up to you. It's 2 in 1 week, 2 celebrities. One, I certainly didn't buy her shoes, and I didn't care much for him. I thought he was an arrogant type. I just didn't care for this guy. He was a loudmouth. He insulted everyone. He put down everyone who voted for Trump. All right, so now it's an issue because he worked for CNN. Why don't you blame CNN for sending him around the world to drink himself to death? You can blame Jeff Zucker for encouraging him to go around the world and get drunk in every city he was in while doing a CNN show, this guy Verdun. We do know that alcohol causes great, great swings in moods. Who has not had a hangover listening to this show? But when you do it every night of your life, eventually you're going to create a depression that you're going to have to spike another way, and usually it's cocaine. And then you get into the vicious cycle. So he admittedly was a coke addict, a heroin addict, a lush. So therefore, what can we draw? What kind of conclusions can we draw from this optical illusion called suicide? The mainstream media will not, I got to repeat this again for the third or fourth time this week. Tell me if I'm wrong. Tell me if you're going to hear once the relationship between antidepressant drugs and suicide on the media. No, you won't. And why? What did Dr. Savage teach you? Why? Look at the board of directors of major media companies and then check out the interlocking corporate directorships, which I've lectured you on for years, and see what other boards they are on. They're sitting on, let's say, a major news corporation and on a drug corporation that makes the antidepressants. So you're never going to see a story about antidepressants and their relationship to the risk of suicide. Yet study after study shows a great, great increase in the risk of suicide in the use of antidepressants. And we'll talk about the other factors here on the show. Right here. To be or not to be, that is the question.
Savage.
Listen, I'd rather be talking about good vibrations. I'd rather be going out to the beach in Malibu today. But I'm not going to the beach in Malibu today. I'm doing what God put me on earth to do, which is do talk radio. I know it's my mission, not just a living. So we're talking about a major national topic which needs to be uncovered. There are causes of this great increase in the incidence of suicide. It's not coming out of the air. One is a loss of connection to God. Laugh if you want. I mean, be as cynical as you want. You'll find a much higher rate of suicide amongst those who have no faith whatsoever than those who have a religion, whether it be Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, or Hinduism, and actually know their religion and know their teachings, where taking one's own life is considered murder, murdering of self. So if you have a strong religious connection and you have a congregation of like-minded individuals, you're much less likely to harm yourself than if you are a wise guy living alone in your big high-rise somewhere and driving a new Ferrari and you hate yourself because your life is meaningless. So there are spiritual, there are medical, there are emotional reasons. To be or not to be, that is the question. You know, you look back in the great literature. To be or not to be, that is the question. William Shakespeare, not taught anymore because he was a white male. He's not as good as someone who rubs the crotch and has bling in their nostrils. But he did the best he could for a white male in the Middle Ages, and he wrote, to be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them, to die, to sleep no more, and by a sleep to say we end the heartache, and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished, to die, to sleep perchance to dream. There's the rub. That's from Hamlet. Tennessee Williams wrote, there comes a time when you look into the mirror, and you realize that what you see is all that you will ever be, and then you accept it, or you kill yourself, or you stop looking in mirrors. Nietzsche, great Nietzsche, the nihilist Nietzsche said, the thought of suicide is a great consolation. By means of it, one gets through many a dark night. And Vincent van Gogh said, and then I have nature and art and poetry, and if that is not enough, what is enough? See, there are ways around it. Now, I'll give you one of my quotes that I've always used, the one's gotten me through a lot of dark nights when I didn't know what to do. I remember reading about one of my heroes, one of the great sculptors of history, Rodin. Some of his work is here in San Francisco at the The young, not that the young, the other one up on the mountain there. He has some great sculptures. But Rodin wrote, work is the only salvation. Work, work, work. So whenever everything else fails, if you're lucky enough to have an outlet in work, whatever it may be, no matter how humble it may be, go to work. That's all. Albert Camus wrote, in the end, one needs more courage to live than to kill himself. Gandhi wrote, if I had no sense of humor, I would long ago have committed suicide. What did Dostoevsky, the great Dostoevsky, write? Killing myself was a matter of such indifference to me that I felt like waiting for a moment when it would make some difference. Okay, sarcasm, the dream of a ridiculous man. So what are the causations? What are the causations in our world today? Our degenerate world. Nothing in the world to hold on to. Did you ever feel yourself emotionally falling down a dark cavern and there's nothing you can grab? And did you ever feel yourself sliding down a chamber and the walls are greased and you're reaching all around as you're falling into this well of depression or the well of loneliness, and you're just trying to grab onto something and it's slick. It's a cylinder and it's slick. I've been there. I have fallen down that channel and there was no bottom to it. And I will tell you what kept me from hitting the bottom. It was children. And this is something you have to understand, which is that unless you stop living for yourself and understand that you have others who will be affected by it, you're finished. You're lost. Because I will tell you this, it's a very sad fact, and it's a well-known fact, I believe, amongst the psychiatric community, that an adult who commits suicide, if he has children or she has children, affects 3 generations, at least 3 generations. People look back and say, where was Grandma? Oh, they don't, hush, hush, my darling. Then the child finds out, and they say, well, wow, what's that? Is it in our genes? What is it? Depression is in our gene. What is this? Depression is serious business. But the answer may not be antidepressant medication. That may be an immediate solution in a crisis, but it's not the long-term solution. There is a whole slew of evidence of suicide related to the use and the overuse of antidepressant medication. I can give you studies if you like them, but you won't look at them, and you'll go to your doctor who will say it's a lie. Because the pharmaceutical companies and the media companies will not report side effects and even deaths linked to these drugs. An analysis of 70 trials of the most common antidepressants involving more than 18,000 people found that they doubled the risk of suicide and aggressive behavior in under 18s. Now, you talk about that, and then you talk about all the school shootings. In almost every case of school shootings, these deranged children were on antidepressant medications, but it's swept away by the drug companies who also have interlocking corporate directorships with the media companies. It's all one and the same, an interlocking set of corporate directorships, something that was once well known to the left wing in America, but somehow they stopped singing that tune. Maybe they've disconnected from reality altogether. Then there's the other issue in America of the culture of death. This has become a death-worshipping society, whether it's a death style that people practice, whatever you can put into that formula. How many amongst you practice a lifestyle as opposed to a death style? What's a death style? You'll figure it out what a death style is. Rampant sex with strangers, is that a lifestyle or a death style? Huh? Oh, you think sex is life? It can be, but sex can be life-giving, but it can be life-taking. There, for example, in Hollywood, there's a huge epidemic of syphilis. Not supposed to talk about it. And it's amongst one particular demographic in America. Not allowed to talk about it. Well, don't talk about it. Just let it keep happening. And the band played on. Some of us see things and we say things, and we lose friends and we lose careers. And the band played on, let the ship go down. Someone has to say something. So there are many factors for depression and suicide, and many people try to fight these impulses with different methodologies. I myself was at a low point. I'm not going to go into me again with woe is me, but first of all, I had children, and I would never hurt them. I would tell you right now, think only of your children. If you're at that point listening to this show or close to it, I want you to think about one thing. What effect will it have on those around you? Both in the immediate family and even outside that immediate circle. What effect would you killing yourself have upon them? Think about them, not about yourself. And go throw cold water in your face and go run around the block. Get out of the house. Stop thinking so much. Get out of the house. Throw water in your face and go take a walk around the block. Go look at all the life around you. And if you're living in the country, look at all the life around you. Listen to the crickets. Look at the birds. They don't commit suicide, do they? They have a pretty tough life. Those birds have a very rough life. They have a real tough life out there in the wild. Yet the animals don't commit suicide. They're an eternal inspiration to those of us who study animal life. Do something for somebody. Don't think about woe is me and yourself. You don't have it so bad. You really don't have it so bad. Now, let's go on to the issues of the day, which we're doing anyway. I'm doing a lot of it all at once. There's so much flowing right now. What about loss? I did a chapter on loss in God, Faith, and Reason. Will you all get out your prayer book right now, if you bought God, Faith, and Reason, and turn together with me as we do our sermon to page 187 of God, Faith, and Reason, where we read together on loss. And Job spoke and said, let the day perish wherein I was born, and the night wherein it was said, a man-child is brought forth, let that day be darkness. You know, you've heard of Job's tears. Job was so depressed, and Job spoke and said, let the day perish wherein I was born, and the night wherein it was said, a man-child is brought forth, let that day be darkness. Job chapter 3, verses 2 to 4. Job spoke and said, you know, there's a botanical, I'm thinking of my botanical years. There was a plant name for Job. Jobii was the species. Jobii, Jobii, I forget what it, Lacrima Jobii, I remember it. Lacrima Jobii, Job's tears. Lacrima Jobii, very beautiful Latin, botanical Latin. So let me read this to you. Loss. A lot of people are in pain right now. Everyone has lost something, either dear to them or that they believed in. People react differently to loss. For example, we see the madness of the progressives expressing their election loss with violence and hatred. What is loss but losing that which you once possessed or thought you possessed? Consider what loss is. What has been the greatest loss in your life? How did you cope with it? Be it of a loved one, a business, your pride, your dignity, your job, your promotion, your health. It's an interesting question to me because loss is part of life. Everyone thinks they're only going to win. They think that every time they throw the dice, they're going to win, but they can't. I want to talk about this issue of loss because a long time ago, back in the 1960s, when I was studying for my bachelor's degree in science, there was a popular writer named Khalil Gibran. He was a Lebanese Catholic writer who later converted to Baha'i, who lived between 1883 and 1931. He wrote a simple book called The Prophet. In it, he wrote on love, children, death, joy, and sorrow. My friends and I read and discussed him avidly. It shows you how different the generations are. So many of the young today are numb. They're frightened of life. They're frightened of love, not even knowing what love is or what loss is. Many of them are afraid to get a driver's license or take their place in society. They can't become adults. A lot of people in America are hurting right now. Years ago, I wrote a book, and in it I told a story called The Yawn Man Gets Cancer. Remember that? Or The Leather Man Gets Cancer? It was about a man in the world in which I grew up in Queens, New York. He was a poor man, as was my father. They were both immigrants. They had probably come over on the same boat together. They had nothing in the beginning. They were dirt poor. They lived 15 to a room. I'm talking about Coldwater Flats in the Lower East Side before it became hip. It was a slum. 15 people lived in that man's apartment. His whole family that had come over from Europe lived in that apartment together down around Canal Street. Well, they went out on the road of life here in America, that yawn man and my father. My father went down his road. The yawn man went down his own road. When I come back, I'll continue this small chapter on loss from God, Faith, and Reason. Maybe it will give you some hope. Maybe you'll come to understand that there are both spiritual and biomechanical or biomedical reasons for the high rates of suicide and or depression in the United States today.
Savage.
Get back to the issues at hand in a minute, but I want to tell you about something really important to all of us, which is sleeping. By the way, it is somewhat related to the subject in a way, because rest is so important. And, falling into bed at night has a whole new meaning for me ever since I started using my Casper mattress. And they do advertise on the show because I do use the mattress. So the engineers at Casper have outdone themselves in creating the most exceptionally comfortable sleep experience ever. And they have 3 different kind of mattresses. The Wave mattress, the Casper mattress, the Essential mattress. They're all different. They're all innovative. And they're all for different kind of people. And you should try them because they're all designed with zone support to coddle and comfort your every move. And they all provide you with the perfect support for every position you might sleep in. Why don't you see for yourself why Casper has hundreds of thousands of happy customers? Try your Casper mattress for 100 nights in your own home for free. Free shipping, free returns. All you got to do is go to Casper.com, code SAVAGE. Not only that, you'll save $50 on the purchase of select mattresses. It's simple. Casper.com, code SAVAGE to see which one you want and save $50. Terms and conditions apply. See site for details. We only have a couple of minutes left in this hour, then I'll be back for another few hours. This is the kind of day I could do 5 hours of radio because this topic of suicide, depression, is something I know a lot about. Both from the issue of reading the literature for so many years and for personal reasons. And no one can ever say that they've overcome this for good, because that's tempting fate. I understand that. But we can say that we found methods to overcome depression, which is what we should be talking about. And moreover, you should know that there are simple things you can do to stop the mood swings, as simple as eliminating sugar in your diet. I know it sounds silly, but if you only understood that eating those desserts, every time I go to a restaurant, I see middle-aged people, and when the meal is finished, they look like children, and they smile when the waiter says, "Would you like a dessert?" And I see them, "Oh, yes, I'll have the tiramisu." And they're like little children smacking their lips, waiting for their big reward. Then they take their diabetes pill, then they take their depression pill, then he takes a Viagra pill. But sugar could be harming your health through depression, addiction, anxiety. It can even affect learning and memory. Many studies on this. Is this the simplistic answer? No. As I said to you before as we started the show today, the whole issue of depression and suicide is a multifactorial question and answer show. Now, before the break, I started to read to you from God, Faith, and Reason on loss. Many of you have lost in your life, whether it's loss in business, lost in love, lost a loved one. And I started to tell you the story about my father and his friend who came over from Europe together. One made it big and one didn't. And what happened to both of them. I'll have to read it when I come back from God, Faith, and Reason. But if I'm looking at this book now as I'm holding it in my hand, God, Faith, and Reason. It was based upon my whole life of searching and struggling for God. From the time I was a little boy, I said I never saw God, nor do I pretend to have any special insights. What you will see in this book are snapshots of God, not a complete film. In my whole life, I've been struggling to find the reason for life, the meaning of life. What's the reason for existence? Why was I born? Why were you born? Why? Well, I found my answer by looking for it.
Savage. Warning, the Savage Nation contains adult language, adult content, psychological nudity. Listener discretion is advised. Now, here he is, author of Liberalism is a Mental Disorder, Trump's War, and God, Faith, and Reason, Michael Savage.
We are talking about suicide. We're talking about depression. I failed to mention another way out of that is music. Many of you know it. I mean, whether it be pop music, country music, rock and roll, classical music. What do you think drives people, for example, to become so great in music? Do you think they're coming from a position of happiness and joy? Some may. I would hazard a guess that many are driven by the opposite of emotions to excel, for example, at the violin. Every time I listen, for example, to Mozart's Requiem, and I tried not to play it, I become speechless. I told you that. I almost couldn't start the show this hour. I shouldn't have played it. And the reason I'm humbled by this music is I can't tell you what it does to me in words other than to say to you, it humbles me to realize that on the earth there was once a man with such a mind that these notes, these ideas, these mathematical forms were in his mind. And we live now in a time that is so debased by comparison. Where is the Mozart of our time? Could a Mozart of our time exist? What if there was a young Mozart? What would they do with him? They'd put him on medication and tell him he had ADD. They would tell him to go smoke medical marijuana and he loses his mind altogether. Anyway, U.S. suicide rates increased more than 25% since 1999, according to the CDC. Suicide at state level from 1999 to 2016, suicide rates increased. Well, why were they killing themselves? Victims acted after relationship problems or loss, substance misuse, physical health problems, job, money, legal, or housing stress. Now, I want to say this right now. If you are suffering with suicidal thoughts today listening to my broadcast, would you please call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 800-273-8255. 800-273-8255. There are people who work suicide prevention lines who can help you. That's number one. But I was looking into this, and I was giving you my reasons, my own reasons from my own studies, my own analysis, and it's an educated analysis. And I've told you that I think that there are connections between so many things. It's a multifactorial problem, multifactorial solutions or answers. And I tweeted suicide rates up. Why? No God, no faith, antidepressant meds, marijuana, too much sugar, negative media, but CNN will blame Trump. I'd end it with a little punchline. I don't know if they've done it yet, but they probably say that Bourdain killed himself because of what Trump has done to America. I guess there's too many jobs now. You can't believe the garbage people answer a reply. Someone says, end-stage capitalism is causing suicide. So I answered, right. In communist paradises, low suicide rates because the state just kills you. You know, people have their answer. I mean, everyone has an answer for everything. How about moral decay and the elimination of God? How about the culture of death? How about the fact that Katzenberg, Matzenberg, and Ratzenberg produce the most vile anti-life imagery the world could ever imagine could be produced by an idea factory called Hollywood? I challenge anyone listening to this show to tell me if they can turn a TV on at night and find a life-affirming radio or life-affirming television show. They don't exist. Every one of them is either sarcastic or outright hateful. Every one of them shows violence, rampant, sick bestiality, sexuality. And so people's brains are filled with this. Yeah, well, that didn't do it to them. No, but it's a factor. Where do they turn for that clear, cold water of their childhood? Where do they turn for that cold brook that they once bathed in a mountain stream somewhere? Where do they ever get that clean water again? There's so many reasons and so many answers, and everyone has their own ox to gore. I get that. But there are universals in this whole issue of suicide that I'm trying to briefly touch upon today, including reading from my own search and struggle called God, Faith, and Reason. And before the last break, I wanted to get back to that little story I was telling you on loss. I should finish it up because I started it. I've got to finish it. So I was telling you about loss and what happened and this and that on page 187. People who I asked you, what has been the greatest loss in your life? How did you cope with it? Be it of a loved one, a business, your pride, your dignity, your job, your promotion, or your health. And then I started to tell a story about my father. And I said I wrote a book years ago called The Yawn Man Gets Cancer. In the book, there was a story about a man in the world in which I grew up in Queens, New York. Poor man, as my father was. They were immigrants. They had probably come over on the same boat together. They had nothing. They were dirt poor when they arrived. They lived 15 to a room. Cold water flats in the Lower East Side before it became cool. It was a slum. 15 people lived in that man's apartment. His whole family that had come over from Europe together lived in that slum apartment near Canal Street. Well, they went out on the road of life here in America, that yawn man and my father. My father went down his road. The yawn man went down his road. They remained friends for life. The yawn man became wealthier than my father. He struck it big in a certain business that became fashionable. And he enjoyed his wealth. He bought a brand new house on Long Island while we stayed in our little attached house in Queens. Now, my father did okay, but he never did great. That's okay. He always made a living, and my mother never had to work. She was a housekeeper, and believe me, a great one. It meant a big deal to us children. We didn't know how great it was to have a mother who was always there, who made sure that the sheets were clean, the meals were served, we did our homework, and did all the other things mothers do. So the yawn man went on in life and made a fortune. He opened a chain of wholesale stores. But then something happened. The trend that had made him wealthy changed. People no longer bought his product, and he went bankrupt. He lost a big house on Long Island and had to move back with his in-laws, back in that same tiny apartment he had left behind when he was an immigrant boy. He fell from heaven to earth. And then I go on from the chapter Loss in God, Faith, and Reason. I'd known him since I was a little kid. I'd always loved him. I loved all my father's friends, all my uncles. I loved everybody. It was an extended family. It was very warm and very close. This doesn't exist in America anymore unless you're in an ethnic community or a very religious community. The sense of togetherness, the close-knit sense, it is gone. Well, let me tell you something. It's beautiful when you have it. It was part of that for me. He was like a second uncle, father. We didn't separate it. Well, I left New York, went out on my own road, and came back years later. I left as a young man and came back a few years later, and there was this man who had been very big in my life, who had been wealthy, reduced to sitting in a chair in the living room in which I had grown up on Utopia Parkway with tears in his eyes. He had a cigar in his hand. He was always a cigar smoker. And he looked at me with tears in his eyes, and he almost reached out and held my hand. He said, Michael, look what happened to me. Look what happened. Did you hear what happened while you were away? I said, no, what happened, Barry? He said, I lost everything. I have nothing, he said. I wish God had given me cancer rather than what he did to me. I didn't know what to say. I was stunned. Well, I went back onto my road. I went back to my plant collecting, my graduate studies, my family. And I heard he got cancer a few months later and died. Now, what is the story about? It's about how he took the loss internally and killed him. He just couldn't cope with the loss. Yes, he was a cigar smoker, but there are many cigar smokers that don't get cancer. Cancer is a very interesting disease, and I don't want to go into that right now. We've all thought about it our whole life. If we're somewhere in the level of consciousness, we all think about diseases from time to time. Well, what do you think all this obsession with food, vitamins, healthy living is about? It's trying to keep away the undertaker, isn't it? Well, of course, he increased the risk of cancer with the cigars, but that's not what did it. When he lost his business, his dignity, and his pride, he was hollowed out inside, and nothing replaced it. As you well know, nature abhors a vacuum, and in this vacuum, something grew, because that vacuum was not filled. The cells multiplied and divided. In my opinion, that's metaphorically how cancer grew in him. So again, I'm asking you an esoteric question, which I realize doesn't have much to do with the news of the day. It isn't what people are talking about on the radio or in the newspaper. I'm asking you to consider what is the greatest loss in your life, because there's not an adult who has not lost something important. How have you coped with the loss, be it of a loved one, a business, your pride, your dignity, your job, your promotion, your health? You must have lost something. Humans lose. Humans lose things. Lots of people are in pain right now, and people react differently to loss. The Lebanese poet and artist Khalil Gibran wrote about loss. He was a very tragic figure who died young and is best known for his classic, The Prophet. But for some reason, his writings touched my friends and me. We didn't know why at the time in college, but everyone was reading him. I'll give you a short example, what he wrote on joy. Your joy is your sorrow unmasked, and the self-same well from which your laughter rises was oftentimes filled with your tears. That's one of the things he wrote on joy and sorrow. What a great insight. Here's another example of what Gibran wrote about children. Your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. You are the bows from which your children as living arrows are sent forth. Well, I like the imagery of children being the arrows, parents the bows. Both are necessary, but once the bow has released the arrow, it can no longer control where the arrow goes. That's my writing. Everything has been done up to that point to put the arrow on the right path, but now the bow can only watch. Who's ever touched anything like this in his life? Not since the Bible itself has anything this good been written about children. And I end it right there. So, I quote from Psalms, the children are a heritage of the Lord, the fruit of the womb is a reward, etc. And happy is a man that hath his quiver full of them. They shall not be put to shame when they speak with their enemies in the gate. Again, I wrote this little thing on loss in God, Faith, and Reason for a couple of reasons, because it was my salvation to write the book. And it's my salvation to get up every day, even days like today when I didn't even want to get out of bed. I just didn't want to do the show today. I didn't feel like it. But I have to do it 5 days a week, and I thought to myself, my audience is waiting for me. They want to hear me. I can't disappoint them. And then I woke up and I read that a cook had killed himself. And the world is now, in shock and mourning. Anthony Bourdain, blah, blah, blah. No, we're all supposed to be in mourning. I don't know the man. I watched him a few times, and I was turned off by him. I thought he was an obnoxious pig, frankly. And I didn't like his hatred for the president. I didn't like that in his cooking shows. I didn't think it had anything to do with it any more than I think Robert De Niro his acting has anything to do with his hatred of Trump. I don't know where it comes up. And so I said, you know what, let me do a show on suicide today because first it was Kate Spade on Monday, an act of aggression if I ever saw one. And I said it then and I'll say it again. So then I did research today. I said, do a quick search on suicide as an act of aggression. And sure enough, I found a study from 1968 in the Journal of General Psychology from the Department of Psychology at Brandeis University when it was still a university by David Lester. Suicide is an aggressive act, a replication with a control for neuroticism. Lester investigated whether persons who had attempted or threatened suicide displayed a general trait of inhibiting aggression and turning aggression onto the self. That's amazing. Turning aggression onto the self. After all, what is suicide but self-murder? It's turning aggression onto yourself, is it not? You ever think about that one? The expectation that this would be so was founded on the psychoanalytic view of suicide and the assumption that suicidal behavior must be related to other behavior patterns in the individual. Lester found, however, that suicidal individuals did not differ on an inventory measure of hostility from non-suicidal individuals in measures of physical aggressiveness, verbal hostility, or indirect hostility. It was found that suicidal individuals were more irritable and had more resentment than non-suicidal individuals, and this was seen as agreeing with the typical clinical picture presented for the adolescent attempted suicide. Well, you can do a lot of searches on it, on suicide, and I would invite you to do so, including great religions of suicide. And as I said in the last segment, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, and Hinduism all condemn suicide. Every religion does. This needs to be taught again and again and again. I'll be right back.
Savage.
So, having a scholarly background, I did a little bit of research before the show all day today. I did look at suicide rates around the world by country. And some of the findings are awesome of which countries have the highest rates of suicide. We're right up there. America is pretty high, 19.5 suicide deaths per 100,000. Take that as the starting point. Figure about 20 suicides per 100,000 according to studies that were done, I think, as of 2015. I don't know. Well, yeah, the latest is 2015. So roughly 20 per 100,000. Now, you go to Muslim countries, they're very low suicide rates, incidentally. I don't know if you know this, but I told you Islam prohibits suicide. It's not in their religion. It's not in their culture. You look at Scandinavia, Norway 12.9, Sweden 17.8. We're higher than Sweden. Russia is off the charts, 32.2 suicide deaths per 100,000. We've well known for years there's a high rate of suicide in Russia because of a number of reasons. Alcoholism is prevalent. It's a hopelessness in Russia. There's no future for most of the people, especially outside of the big cities. So Russia 32.2 is about the highest in the world. And weirdly enough, you'll never guess which country has one of the lowest suicide. One of the highest, sorry. Let's start to realize. Russia is 32.2. This is a shocker. Argentina 23.7. Why does Argentina have a high suicide rate? I don't understand that. I can't figure it out. Australia 15 suicide deaths per 100,000. India, 17.9. If you're interested in facts, Somalia, Ethiopia, they're still pretty high. Ethiopia's 20.7. I mean, they live destitute, horrible lives in those places. There's no reason to live in those countries. Central African Republic, 30 suicide deaths per 100,000. Central African Republic. That's about the highest I have found here. And you just search the world and you say, well, what's the reason for it? What are the reasons for suicide in these countries? I mean, there's a million reasons you can come up with. What about distribution by females and males? In America, is it higher amongst men or women? Well, now that's an interesting one. Rate by males and by females. I'll get to that when I come back.
Savage.
All right, so it's not a funny topic at all. Suicide rates increased more than 25% since 1999. And again, I want to say to those who are listening to the show, if anyone is right now thinking of hurting themselves, call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 800-273-8255, because talking to people can take you off that edge, take you off the cliff. Kate Spade, now this cook, knocked himself off. We don't know how. But again, if you want to call on these questions of why do you think suicide is at epidemic levels, I've given you my reasons. I'd rather have the personal calls. Have you ever tried to kill yourself? What prevented you from doing so? Or those of you who deal with suicidal ideations on a fairly regular basis, what do you do to bury those feelings or to avoid them? And then I talked about the dangers of antidepressants with regard to suicide. I've talked about marijuana and depression. There's so many more things we can do, but it's an only limited amount of time. So I looked at U.S. suicide rates, which increased more than 25% since 99, and I looked into the states. This is interesting. It's very interesting to me. In 2016, there were 45,000 Americans, 10 or older, who died by suicide. But listen to this. It's very unexpected. The increases were stark in the Intermountain West, including Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, Utah, North and South Dakota, Kansas, Minnesota, and Oklahoma. Now, why is that? Why would these clean Western states have an increase all of a sudden? Guns were used in half the suicides in 2016. Suffocation, including hanging, was the next most common method, followed by poisoning. Opioids were present in 31% of those who die by suicide. Person's intentions are not always clear in someone. Drugs are present because these were deemed to be suicides by self-inflicted poisoning. Now, here's another fact, and I'll let you go with the facts, and we'll take the calls. Stark increases in the United States in suicides by white women and Native Americans. In the age group of greatest vulnerability to suicide, which is ages 45 to 64, the report found rates among women vaulted 80%. So something's going on in our society. There's many things you can blame, and some are obvious and some are not obvious. Some are absurd. You'll start blaming Trump. You'll hear that. I'm surprised CNN hasn't come up with that one yet, that Anthony Bourdain took his own life because he was so depressed at the thought of Donald Trump staying in office. No matter how many souffles he made, he couldn't get Trump out of office. Well, anyway, these are the topics on a very, very difficult topic to begin with, which is suicide. I don't want to leave behind the big one to me, which is the overprescription, the overuse of antidepressants. That's one of the great stories of our time that is being ignored. And I will refer again to a great study, an analysis of 70 different medical trials of the most commonly used antidepressants. And it was a big study of 18,000 people. It was not a small study. And they found that antidepressants double the risk of suicide and aggressive behavior in under 18s. The review, the biggest of its kind into the effects of the drugs, was carried out by the Nordic Cochrane Center and analyzed by University College London. And the results were published in an editorial in BMJ, British Medical Journal. Experts said the review's findings were startling, deeply worrying. It says people in the UK are consuming more than 4 times as many antidepressants as they did 2 decades ago. No kidding. How about in America, how many people are on antidepressants? Like M&M's today at a Halloween party. That's all. You go to the quack, whatever you tell the quack, he throws an antidepressant at you. He doesn't know any better. And it's not a joke. It's not a laughing matter. Then they prescribe them to children now. Professor Peter Gucci, the lead author from the Nordic Center, said, antidepressants do not work in children. That is pretty clear. In the randomized trials, children say that they don't work for them, but they increase their risk of suicide. What I get out of this colossal underreporting of suicides is that SSRIs likely increase suicides in all ages. Drug companies, of course, deny this. Spokesman for Eli Lilly said no regulatory authority has ever determined that Lilly withheld or improperly disclosed any data related to these medications. All right, fine. The drugs which were reviewed included duloxetine, fluoxetine, also known as Prozac, paroxetine, sertraline, venlafaxine, and they belong to two classes, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors and antidepressants, SSRIs, and serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors, SNRIs. So again, I've been trying to tell you that there are natural methods of ameliorating depression, from as simple as getting out of your house and walking around the block, to running around the block, to stopping the sugar, to taking massive doses of ascorbate, meaning vitamin C powder. You want an immediate kick, I'll tell you right now, this I learned 45 years ago from geniuses in the field. Do you know which substance crosses the blood-brain barrier as quickly as heroin, actually faster than heroin? It's a very small molecule. It's called vitamin C. So, I have told many people over my lifetime, look, you just get the powdered vitamin C, take a spoon of it, flat teaspoon, put it in water, and slug it down. Within seconds, you're going to feel an energy just run through your brain. Then go for a run around the block or a bike ride or a walk. You're going to get a charge out of that. Now, I remember reading earlier studies many years ago on this subject in the 80s that which levels were elevated in people who were found to have committed suicides. Cortisol. Cortisol levels were elevated in people who had committed suicide. Now, I don't know whether the cortisol levels were elevated prior to the suicide or as a result of the adrenergic reactions at the moment of jumping off that roof. I don't really know the answer to that. But cortisol is another interesting subject to discuss and investigate on your own if you have a medical mind and you can do it. And with the advent of the Google search engines and others, it's amazing what the average intelligent person can discover today on their own without having to go to a medical library. Just look up cortisol levels in people who commit suicide, what drives cortisol up, what reduces cortisol levels. Again, vitamin C will reduce cortisol, lower cortisol levels. So there's so much to be learned that is not being studied because there's no money in it. All the money is in drugs and drug development and the prescribing of drugs. So you're not going to find much about this in the newspapers, nor will you see much about it on television tonight. Because, as I said to you, and I have to repeat again before I take the calls, we're almost 2 hours into the show. I have not taken one call because there's a subject very close to my heart. I've dealt with it since I'm 17 or 18 years old. In fact, in some ways, this whole issue has driven me in some ways to produce what I do every day and what I've done throughout my whole life. I have found that work is the only salvation. Work, work, work. You take me away from work, and basically I fall apart. It's very difficult for me, Michael Savage, to enjoy his life outside of working. Working is the most enjoyable thing I do, which is why I do it so well. But worked very well for Rodin. He didn't stop working. It worked very well for some great artists, for example, who after they had crippling arthritis, who can name that artist? He had crippling arthritis in his old age, but he didn't stop painting. He didn't go to an old age home. He had the brush tied to his palm so he could continue to paint without the use of his fingers. Does anyone know the name of that artist? His paintings are still in the great museums. Work is the only salvation. Work, work, work. Rodin wrote that. It's true. So, I don't know. Maybe this is too depressing a topic, and maybe we should move on from this topic of depression and suicide. But I owe it to my callers to take their calls, so let's blow through them right now. If you've been holding and I come to you, let's just do a 30-second thing, okay? Susan on KSFO Radio. Go ahead, line 3. What's on your mind?
Well, I worked on suicide prevention, certified through the county of Santa Cruz for 8 years, and I'm a Catholic psychic, so I read the dead with my clients. And when I was trained, I absolutely would see, after being trained, a thread or a theme in the callers, and they would say that they were basically holding in so much pain and anger. And I learned from a psychiatrist validating what you said, that they really want to kill someone else, and they're not even aware of it. So they're kind of cashing their blue chip stamp book of anger toward themselves. And they don't want to do that, but they're walking around in pain and agony for years. And then they really do believe that they will never, ever feel any better. And when they're raised, someone has to validate them, their core sense of self, enough that they can go into the world and cope. And many times that's not the case. So what I found, interestingly, is if we were lucky enough to have them call, they would be rageful for about 45 minutes to an hour, and then they would cry, if you're lucky, and comforting them. And I never lectured them. That doesn't work. That can send them right over the edge. And so, and reading the dead, people will come in, and the families many times, if they lose
wait, you're making great sense, and I'm loving every second of your conversation. What do you mean by reading the dead? What does that mean?
Well, I'm a medium clairvoyant. I'm a Catholic psychic for 35 years here in Santa Cruz. But when I grew up wealthy. My father beat me. My mother mocked me. So I tried to commit suicide when I was 19, went into therapy for 10 years, and was comforted and learned to cope through the co-founder of the Haight-Ashbury Clinic, Dr. Wesson.
Huh.
And years later, I said to him, we ought to write a book. And we started a book using the sessions as chapters. And I said, you're never going to finish this book. And he said, I would never start a venture and not finish it. But psychically, he finished 4 chapters, edited, and then he dropped the book because of his own personal issues. So unfortunately, I was psychically right about my own life. But one of the things I wanted to do was to go into the world and comfort people that are unhealed. You know, I'm not a psychiatrist, but certainly
let's slow down for a minute. You worked at a suicide prevention hotline. You base it all upon voice. Is that correct?
What was that?
You base your insights and your therapy all on voice. Is that correct?
On my gift from the Holy Spirit, but
oh, I understand, but you're not meeting the person. It's over the phone, correct?
Well, in working on suicide prevention, I certainly separated out my readings. That wouldn't be appropriate. However, in my profession for 35, 40 years now, giving readings, I go in a trance, and many times people want to read the dead, whatever the reason that they died, whether they...
Well, so wait a minute, hold on. Now, I assume you've listened to my show before. Is that correct?
I love you. Oh, I love you.
What are you reading in me? Tell me what you read in me, 30 seconds or less.
I actually think that what I feel is you're going to end up being a spiritual counselor to the White House. And I think you'll love it. Yes, you'll do the thing with the animals. And it's funny, I found homes for 210 feral cats and fought the Rangers in Aptos and threatened...
Hold on, this is very interesting. Wait. Let's forget the cats for a minute. I'm allergic to cats. Okay. And I don't mean Katzenberg. I mean I'm allergic to the animal cat. I will be right back on the Savage Nation.
Savage.
Welcome back to the Savage Nation. We'll continue our discussion of the topics of the day that I've been talking about. But first, I'm going to tell you about a great product called Super Beats. Now, look, you know I've talked about Super Beats for years because I believe in them. But they added something new, and I spoke to the manufacturer the other day. They created a new product called Super Beats Energy Plus. What they did was combine beets with green tea, another superfood hero. Now, this new product is made from non-GMO beets that are infused with an added boost from green tea extract. So listen to me. If you thought about trying Super Beets for a healthy energy kick, this is the product for you with its natural plant-based caffeine source. You got to try this new version, Super Beets Energy Plus. Just try it. All new natural berry flavor helps promote improved energy, mental focus, support a healthy cardiovascular system. And so if you try it, I believe you will definitely feel the difference that the green tea makes to Super Beets. And here's the kicker. We're only making this product available to the listeners of our show, so make sure you take advantage of this new release today. Don't miss out. Call 800-481-0504, 800-481-0504. Go to SavageLovesBeats.com. And with your first order of Super Beets, you're going to get a free 30-day supply of Super Beats Energy Plus infused with green tea for free. That's the second batch for free. They're going to send you indicator strips to show you how it's working in your body and free shipping. Again, 800-481-0504 or savagelovesbeats.com today. Rob on KLIF, line 6. I'm glad you called. Go ahead, please.
Hi, Dr. Savage. I am fascinated by the conversation, sir, because I've never had a depressed day in my life. Yes, of course, I've been sad, and I've seen depression all around me, but I'm fascinated.
No, I'm fascinated by your call because you're not alone. I think that many, many men would agree with you. They don't even know what we're talking about. And by the way, seriously, I'm not doing this in a sarcastic manner. Many men of another generation wouldn't even admit to depression even if they had it, nor would they know the signs of it, nor should you look into it, frankly. In other words, if you don't feel it, why bother with it, right?
Right, but yet I see it all around me in my family and my friends.
So what is it about them that lets them understand that they have depression, or what is it that protects you from depression? Let's put it that way.
I don't think that they have the coping mechanisms that maybe I've internalized by my life experiences. I don't know. I'm just speculating.
Well, what is your number one coping mechanism when you get sad?
To have a conversation with someone I love.
Bingo. No, see, I remember my mother, God rest her soul, she died many years ago. She would say to me, I don't know why people need psychiatrists so much. She said to me, if you have a good friend you could talk to, it's actually better.
Absolutely.
But that was a day when you see. But that was in a day in America when you could find a good friend who you can talk with who would listen to you. We're living in a time where there are no good friends, much, except maybe where you live. Where are the good friends anymore in this country? Do they even exist? Everything has a price tag on it.
Michael Savage, a host like no other. Savage, a host like no other.